to this talk on the road to HTTPS everywhere. Let me introduce myself. I'm a computer scientist, and I worked several years at a company named A-Position. Most probably you haven't heard the name of the company because it doesn't exist anymore. But most of the founders of that company later founded Botify. I'm sure you heard the name of the Botify. And I have two nationalities, French and Turkish. And that's all. So we can begin this talk. HTTP is a protocol which governs the communications between the web servers and the clients. Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure is a combination of HTTP and Transport Layer Security, TLS. Transport Layer Security is a network protocol which establishes an encrypted connection to an authenticated peer over an untrusted network. Before TLS, there was SSL, Secure Sockets Layer. SSL was originally developed by Netscape, and because it is proprietary to Netscape, Internet Engineering Task Force decided to make an effort, and in January 1999, TLS 1.0 came out. Because of this historical reason, today we still use SSL. However, as SSL doesn't exist anymore, it is better not to use it. For example, it's better to say TLS certificate instead of SSL certificate. Transport Layer Security is designed to provide three essential services to all the applications running above it, which are authentication, encryption, and integrity. And now let's look at the benefits of HTTPS. On your site, if you want users' experience only your content and design, then HTTPS is the only solution. Otherwise, users may experience what intruders may provide. The intruders may rewrite the content on your site, inject malicious or unwanted content. HTTPS protects the privacy and the security of the users. And HTTPS is a requirement for HTTP2. I would not say upcoming Internet protocol. To me, it is the present Internet protocol. And HTTPS is a requirement for Brotli. Brotli is a compression algorithm more effective than gzip. If you care about the performance on your site, you may think of using Brotli. Then you will need HTTPS. HTTPS has not been a requirement for AMP yet officially by Google. However, some AMP fields already require HTTPS, which are AMP embed, AMP add, AMP form, AMP video, and AMP iframe. A growing number of new web platform features, such as accessing users' geolocation, taking pictures, recording video, enabling offline app experiences, require explicit user opt-in, which in turn requires HTTPS. Service workers require HTTPS. Service workers basically make the website available offline. And HTTPS, with HTTPS, you can access referrer data from HTTP sites, of course. And Google has a mission. Google explains their mission on their site that they are committed to making the web a safer place, not only for Google users, but for all users. Google thinks HTTPS makes it difficult for internet service providers, governments, and others to watch what we are doing online. So how Google motivates HTTPS? By two ways. The first one is by SEO. In 2014, they declared HTTPS as a ranking signal. And since then, constantly they showed their will to see HTTPS everywhere. The second way Google motivates HTTPS migration is by Chrome. First, by HTTP2. HTTPS was not a requirement for HTTP2 in the beginning, but it became because of the browsers Firefox and Chrome. They stated that they would support HTTP2 only over encrypted connections. And Google began marking HTTP sites this year in January. First, they began marking HTTP sites which transfer passwords and credit card information. But lastly, they announced that they will mark HTTP sites next month in October, all the HTTP sites in Chrome private mode. If you look at the migration dates of top sites, we see that Google is the first top site which moved to HTTPS. And it's also interesting to see some sites like Amazon. Amazon migrated to HTTPS very recently. So among top sites, Google was one of the first moving to HTTPS. But however, it is one of the last in bringing HSTS. Google brought HSTS to Google.com, only Google.com, last year. Google shared with us data about top 100 non-Google sites and their HTTPS states. According to Google, these sites have 25% of all web traffic, which is enormous. I checked the data periodically on their site, and on September last year, less than 50 sites were working on HTTPS, and this year, August, almost 70 top sites are working on HTTPS, which shows us that top sites are moving to HTTPS. 60% of web pages loaded by Firefox are now using HTTPS, and we see the increase beginning January this year. Now let's look at TLS certificates. TLS certificates by validation level, there are three: domain validation, organization validation, and extended validation. In domain validation, the certificate authority only validates the domain ownership. In organization validation, certificate authority validates the domain ownership as well as organization. And extended validation is similar to organization validation, but it has a more strict vetting process. And to the end user, domain validation and organization validation don't have differences in their appearances. However, extended validation is different, and the user can see the organization name on the browser. Type of TLS certificates by secured domains, there are again three. Single name, the certificate is valid only for one domain. And in wildcard, it is valid for the domain and its subdomains. In multi-domain certificates, the certificate is valid for several sites. HTTP Strict Transport Security, HSTS. By using HSTS, websites tell the web browsers that it should only be communicated by using HTTPS, not HTTP. Therefore, it eliminates HTTP to HTTPS redirects. Because of that, it's very good for the performance, and it strengthens the security of the site. You can check HSTS of a website on Chrome if you query the domain, and if you see strict in one of these yellow fields, then you can decide that HSTS is activated for this domain. And there is a HSTS preload list, which is hard-coded to Chrome. In fact, because HSTS strengthens the security of the website, but for the first connection, because it will be in HTTP, the website is still open to the man-in-the-middle attacks. So they decided to use a hard-coded file. In this file, we find the domains which are, which are HTTPS by default. And what's interesting is we find top domains in this file. Okay, now we will talk about HTTPS migration. Before the migration, you should choose well your IT infrastructure. On eastls-fastjet.com, you can find this table which shows the web servers and their support to TLS improvements. For example, by looking at this table, we can see that IIS doesn't give support to dynamic record sizing. The same table exists also for the CDNs. And for example, by looking at this table, we see that Cloudflare gives support to all the TLS improvements. If you are using SNI, server name indication, basically SNI is enables several TLS certificates for one IP. Most of the clients support SNI, but there may be some web servers which still don't support. So it's better to check them before. And you should consider HTTP2. Why? Because once you migrate to HTTPS, you will certainly migrate to HTTP2. However, for example, if your web server is using operating system Debian 9.0 or Ubuntu 16.04, then there are no problem with HTTP2. However, for the other operating systems, because they don't give support to ALPN, for example, if you move to HTTP2, your users on Chrome will fall back to HTTP1. You should plan only HTTPS migration, nothing else. You may want to mix all the migrations together with HTTPS. For example, changing the URL structure or architecture of the site or the content changes maybe. John Mueller answered this question about mixing all the migrations with HTTPS, and he told that it's not a good idea, so it's better to keep simple. Before the migration, you should not give access to users and bots to HTTPS. First, you get on staging server a TLS certificate from reliable certificate authority which can give you technical support later on, and you should choose a 2048 bit key. You can configure the staging server by using Mozilla SSL configuration generator. It's a free tool. If you want to prevent mixed content on your destination site, then content security policy header you should use content security policy headers. With upgrade in secure request, the HTTP sources will be converted to HTTPS, and you will not have a mixed content problem. And with the report only, you can report, in fact, HTTP sources on which page you find HTTP. You may want to preserve the referrer, because by default, when you move on HTTPS, referrer will be lost when you send your users from your site to an HTTP site. But if for you it's important, the traffic is important, if you're selling traffic, then you may want to keep referrer data, so you can use these values. And you should collect data before the migration from the crawl of the sites, production site and the staging site, web server logs, Google Search Console, analytics tools, and from external links. You should analyze data on staging server. On each page, you check the scheme protocol of the URL of the page and URLs of the links and web assets on the page. Of course, the status code, HTTP headers and content, and the tags in your pages, canonical, hreflang, and meta tags. And on production side, you should analyze data. First, you should get rid of crawl waste. And afterwards, you should analyze error pages because you don't want multiple redirections, for example. And you should decide about low-quality content and orphan pages. For example, are you going to de-index them, or are you going to integrate orphan pages to your to the structure of the site? And you should prepare a migration section planning if you are moving in sections for the big sites. And you should prepare URL list, mapping, monitoring, and updates. Mapping is from which URL you will redirect to which URL. And monitoring is for your active pages and important active pages. It's better to monitor them. And update URL list is basically your external links. It's better to prepare a list of data before the migration, because after the migration you will not want to lose your time with this. And you prepare 2 sitemaps for HTTP and HTTPS. And you can check the common configuration and the security flows with SSL Labs. I think this is widely known. And there is also TLS Observatory, which is richer than SSL Labs. It includes third-party tests like SSL Labs 2. And then on destination side, you should register your site on Google Search Console. The naked domain and www of the domain. And if you have mobile on the origin, if you have subdomains or directories on the origin. And on destination side, you should configure Google Search Console. You should replicate origin's configuration by looking at URL parameters, geo-targeting, disabove, and preferred domain. And you should submit sitemaps. And you should configure analytics tools, your analytics tools also. When you are ready, you give users and bots access to HTTPS. And you implement redirects from HTTP to HTTPS in 301 status code. And you collect and analyze data from, this time, only from the crawl of the production site, from web server logs, and again, analytics tools. And you should update URLs after the migration on your profile links, such as Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Your URLs on your owned media, partner sites, and ad campaigns. And after the migration, you continue collecting, monitoring, analyzing data. From the crawl of the production site and sitemaps this time, web server logs, Google Search Console, analytics tools, and external links. And after the migration, you should implement HSTS. First, you start HSTS with 5 minutes, and then progressively you can increase HSTS first 1 week and then 1 month. And once you see that there are no problems, HSTS doesn't create any problem, then you may think of applying to Chrome HSTS Preload list with almost 2 years of max age and preload information. And I would like to finish this talk with 2 quotes from https://cio.com and Jane Addams. So that's all. Thank you for listening to me.